Today we are going to work on project number 2, Office 2013, Excel, Chapter 2, Formulas and Functions. So what we need to do first is log in to My IT Lab with your username and password. When you do so, you'll come to the course homepage like you did for the last project. Then what we need to do is go to Course Materials, and find the second assignment. Scroll down, please. Project 2. Click on the down arrow button and the open option. What we're going to do is download the Excel file, and if you'd like the instructions, go to download files. So here are the instructions you can download, and I've already done so. So we can download the Exploring Grader. So you click on that and download. Okay, and then you can close out of it. Okay, now that we've downloaded the assignment, we need to find it and open it. When you download it from My IT Lab, it should go into your Downloads folder unless you have a different path specified. So what I did was I found it in my Downloads folder, and then I moved it over to another place where I could save it or work with it, like my flash drive, and then I opened it up. So as you can see, I opened up the Excel file. It's exploring E02 grader h2.xlsx. It's an Excel file. Okay, so now we have the file open. We've completed step 1. Moving on to step 2, we need to enter an if function in cell E5, right here, to calculate the regular pay based on a regular 40-hour week for the first employee. So for Abram, we calculate his regular pay. We have criteria. If the employee worked 40 hours or less, calculate the pay based on the hourly rate, right here, hourly wage of $9.95, and number of actual hours worked. So his hours worked are 48. If an employee worked more than 40 hours, calculate the pay based on the hourly rate for only 40 hours. It says use relative and absolute cell references appropriately. Do not enter the value 40 in the function. Refer to cell B21 that contains the value instead. So here's B21. Okay, so what I'll do is try and go through each step and create the function. So to insert a function in E5, we click on the cell, and then we go up here to the toolbar and to formulas. We go over to the left and we want to insert a function. We can either type it up here, it'll do a search for it, or if you have it already over here, you click if, and then OK. So it will pull up this box. What we need to do is enter first a logical test, then a value if true, and a value if false. Okay, so let's take a look at the first part of this function. If the employee worked 40 hours or less, calculate the pay based on the hourly rate and number of actual hours worked. So what we have to do is if the employee worked 40 hours or less. So we look at hours worked, which is cell D5. And we want to put that in the function arguments up here, so we click D5 here, and we want to know if that hours worked is less than or equal to 40. So we do the less than or equal sign, which is here, that's the less than sign, less than or equal to, and then we can't just type in 40, we want to reference the table down here. We see base work hours is 40, so that's cell B21, we click that. However, because we're going to we have to remember to use relative and absolute cell references, because what we're going to do is essentially copy this formula all the way down for all of these employees. So what we need to do is make cell B21 an absolute reference. So we click on that, B21, and then if you have a laptop, you have to press the function key and then F4. If you have just a desktop with a keyboard, it's just F4. So for me, I have a laptop, function F4. As you can see, there are two $signs, one before the column and one before the row. So what that's going to do is lock both the column and the row, B21. So this value is going to be locked for all of these when we copy it down. So that's our logical test. So we're going to test if that's true or false. For the first one, as you can see, D5 is 48 hours. So you see here 48 hours, and 48 hours is not less than or equal to 40. So as you can see, it's false. So if that's the case, what we need to do is calculate we put our cursor down here. If it's false, we want to calculate it based on 40 hours. So we want to, if an employee worked more than 40 hours, calculate the pay based on the hourly rate for only 40 hours. So again, the hourly rate for 40 hours is here. Hourly wage is the same no matter what for 40 hours right here. So we're going to take cell C5. Now we've skipped over this because when we entered in for the first employee, it's false. So we move down to here and we click the hourly wage, C5, $9.95, and we're going to multiply that by B21, which is the base work hours. As you can see, it's the hourly wage $9.95 times 40, because anything more than 40 would be overtime, would be eligible for overtime pay. However, as you notice, this cell, it's a table reference. It's referenced to the assumptions table. So what we need to do is make that an absolute reference, similarly to how we did that for the logical test, because when we copy it down for all these employees, we don't want this to move down. So we press again function F4, and that makes it an absolute value. As you can see, it's 398 here. So that's if it's false. Now if it's true, we want to calculate if the employee worked 40 hours or less. So not in this case, but in some of the other cases, calculate the pay based on the hourly rate. So the hourly rate is here times the number of actual hours worked, which would be right here. So if basically this is saying if he worked 40 hours or less, then we would have used the true value and multiplied this by this. But since he worked 48 hours, it was false, and we use that, but we can't calculate for anything over 40 hours. So instead of basing it off of this, we base it off of the base work hours. So that's basically the equation. C5 times D5, yep, that looks about correct. So what I'm going to do is press OK. and it's going to calculate the regular pay. Moving on to step 3, now we have to calculate the overtime pay. It says in the instructions to enter an if function in cell F5 to calculate the overtime pay for the first employee. Okay, to do this for the first employee, we have to look at the amount of hours they worked, and we have to insert the function. So we do, again, on the Formulas tab, Insert Function, and we want to use an if function, so we click OK. The logical test now, what we're going to try to find out is if the employee, in this case Abram, worked more than 40 hours. We'd have to use those extra hours, which in this case he worked 48, so 8 hours over. We have to calculate those extra 8 hours times the overtime rate, which is 1.5 times the hourly rate. So I'll take this step by step. The logical test would be if, let's see, so D5, hours worked, is greater than or equal to, I'll put the greater than or equal to sign, and then B21, which would be the base work hours. I click on that cell, B21. And again, we want to use absolute referencing because when we copy this formula down, we want this base work hours value to be the same. We don't want it to move. So we want to lock this cell and lock this row. So we just have to click on the cell and function F4, and it'll make it absolute value. So we're saying if the value is greater than 40, in this case it's true, we have to calculate the number of hours. So what we do is we put a parenthesis. It's going to be like a two-part equation. We need to first figure out how many hours above the 40 hours that Abram worked. So we have to take his hours worked, which is cell D5, and then we have to subtract it from B21, which is a 40-hour week. Again, we want it absolute reference because when we copy it down, we don't want the cell over here to move. So we go function F4. So that basically, if you do the calculation, my mistake. Okay, D5 minus here, function F4. So as you can see, 8 hours he worked overtime. We want to multiply that by the overtime rate, which is one and a half times his hourly rate, the employee's hourly rate. So if we look at the overtime rate over here, we click on that cell, it's B22. We don't want this to move when we do it for the other employees, so I'm going to click on that and make it an absolute value. And then I'm going to multiply that because it's like time and a half, multiply that by C5, which is his regular hourly wage. I'm going to put a parenthesis on that. And that would be his overtime wage. If it's false, let's see, if he worked less than 40 hours, then overtime pay would be 0. So I just put a 0 in there. And then hit OK.